this book. I had this book open every day. I turned the pages, studied it. I wanted to know how they made the movie, how they just every aspect about it. So, without further ado, also this pennant is original from the 90s, Universal Studios, Florida, the Back to the Future ride. I love this movie, if you can't tell. So, this is Back to the Future, the official book of the complete movie trilogy, featuring exclusive material on the latest blockbuster movie. Got to be very careful with this because the book is quite fragile. I'm going to cover that because it has my personal information. So here we have it. Page 1. Back to the Future, the official book of the complete movie trilogy. This was put together by Michael Glasterin and Sally Hibben, the Mallard Press. This has scenes from Back to the Future 2, and then Back to the Future 3. The production value on this is awesome. There's so many things that they thought about in the making of this movie. This is an image from Back to the Future 3 when Marty first goes back to 1885. I don't know where they filmed this, but it's very pretty. I'm sure it's probably somewhere very famous. This book, by the way, was copyright 1990. So, the table of contents has the foreword, the making of Back to the Future, the genesis, the words and pictures, Bob's vision, the Space-Time Continuum. I have a funny story about that when we get to that section. The 5 Faces of Michael J. Fox, featuring Michael's McFlies, Michael J. Fox, and special effects. The McFly Family, which features Leah Thompson, The Changing Ages, The Doc, The Backyard Genius, featuring Dr. Emmett Brown, Christopher Lloyd, The Time Machine, Flying Cars, Doc's Laboratory, Clara the School Marm, and Mary Steenburgen. The next section is Buford, Biff, Griff, and the Gang, featuring Thomas F. Wilson. The Changing Face of Hill Valley is the next section. So we have 1885, 1955, 1985, Bifferific 1985, 2015. Oh, I wish it was still 2015. And then the last section is Back to the Drawing Board. Now, obviously, this book came out as a promotional item when the third movie came out. So, it seems like it might lean more heavily towards featuring elements of the third movie, since that's what this picture is here versus a picture from the first movie, which is so classic, or from the second movie. But I could be wrong. This is my first time cracking this book in a while, so this will be like reading it for the first time for me. So, alright, we have the foreword by Robert Zemeckis and David Gale, and it says, "No one can predict the future, and in 1980, when we first conceived Back to the Future, phrase in the English language used by Presidents Reagan and Bush in speeches promising to take America back to the future. That's very interesting. Or that we'd be writing the introduction to a book about the history of the whole thing. But maybe that's why everyone finds the future so fascinating. You never know what it's going to be. We certainly didn't. Or as Dr. Emmett Brown said about the future in part 2, well, that's all in the past. That was Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. Alright. The making of Back to the Future. Director Robert Zemeckis and screenwriter Bob Gale had always hoped to make a movie about time travel, a subject that had fascinated them both since childhood. This is not written here, but something I've always felt is if I could have any wish in the world, it would be to be able to travel through time. If I had a superpower, that's what I would choose. Anyway, when Gale returned home to visit his parents in St. Louis after the filming of Used Cars in 1980, he made what would turn out to be a significant discovery, his father's high school yearbook. As he thumbed through the pages, he began to wonder what it would have been like to go to school with his father. Would they have been friends with many of the same interests, or would they have had nothing in common and dislike each other on sight? When Gale mentioned this premise to Zemeckis, he too became excited with the possibilities, and thus was born the story of Marty McFly, the 17-year-old who travels back through time to meet his parents as teenagers. The Genesis. It's about a kid who goes back in time, meets his parents, and his mother falls in love with him. This one sentence was the starting point for a motion picture trilogy that would span the course of 5 years in production and captivate millions of moviegoers around the world. This was, of course, the development pitch for the original Back to the Future. Zemeckis and Gale took their fledgling project to Columbia Pictures, the studio that had produced their last film. It was an easy pitch, recalls Bob Gale. Frank Price, the head of the studio, was excited by the concept. Bob Zemeckis kept explaining specific scenes that we had thought of, and I kept leaning over whispering to him that he had said enough. I knew we had it. They were given a script development deal by Columbia in September 1980 and delivered the first draft in April 1981, but Columbia passed on the project. Big mistake, I'm just saying. According to Gale, they thought it was a really nice, cute, warm film, but just not raunchy enough. They suggested that we take it to Disney. After making the rounds of other studios who echoed Columbia's sentiments, they did exactly that. They took it to Disney. Unfortunately, once there, they were told that a film which featured a mother falling in love with her son, no matter what the circumstances, was not quite traditional family fare and a bit too risque to be made under the Disney banner. There was one producer in Hollywood who was very interested in Back to the Future, Steven Spielberg. Spielberg had been the executive producer of I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars, and Zemeckis and Gale had collaborated on the screenplay of Spielberg's 1941. Although there was a great temptation to ally themselves again with Spielberg to get their film made, Zemeckis and Gale were hesitant since none of their previous films together had been box office successes. Zemeckis and Gale worried about gaining a reputation of being no more than protégés of Spielberg, dependent upon the director to get work. That was a very, very long sentence. I think that sentence went from here all the way up to here. Moreover, they were also concerned that Spielberg Back to the Future didn't prove to be a success, that situation would soon change. Zemeckis, depressed and frustrated at the inability to get Back to the Future into production, decided he would instead direct the first good script he was offered. That script came from producer and star Michael Douglas, and Zemeckis had his first certified box office smash in Romancing the Stone, 1984. In a town where it said that you're only as good as your last picture, Robert Zemeckis was suddenly hot in studios that had once turned him down now approached him and Bob Gale about making Back to the Future. Mulling over the offers, the pair decided to go with the person who had always been enthusiastic from the start, Steven Spielberg. Back to the Future was a go. As the film headed into pre-production, all concerned felt the addition of a second producer to work with Bob Gale would benefit the production. Executive producer Frank Marshall suggested Neil Canton, with whom he had worked many times since 1971 on What's Up, Doc. Canton read the script, met with Zemeckis and Gale, and the team was complete. Before I keep going, this picture is of Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox. It's him waking up in the year 1955 to find himself face to face with the 17-year-old girl who ultimately becomes his mother, Leah Thompson. So this is from the first movie. It's there's a great Calvin Klein interaction there where she thinks his name is Calvin Klein because it's written in his underwear. Continuing forward, asked the biggest problem he was faced with when given the task of directing Back to the Future. Bob Zemeckis remembers, "We had relatively little money. We had to make an enormous film on a limited budget as well as a limited time schedule and make it the best we could." Nothing about that has changed in the film industry. The film was finished within weeks of its release, with the sound effects for the 70mm prints added a mere 24 hours before the first show for the general public. Wow. While in production, no one connected with the film had any idea that the movie they were making would prove to be a smash hit. It was only in the first sneak previews, says Zemeckis, that we realized we had something special. The audience loved it, and their reaction was beyond our wildest expectations. Up until that point, it was anyone's guess. Yeah, I was a child when this came out. I wonder what it was like if you were an avid moviegoer, what it was like pre-Back to the Future versus post-Back to the Future. I've only been conscious in this world in a post-Back to the Future world, and I feel very lucky. The next section is called Going Back to the Future. Okay. In its release, Back to the Future proved to be an enormous success, grossing over $350 million worldwide, making it one of the biggest box office movies of all time. Letters poured in to the filmmakers from all over the world asking for a sequel. When Universal Pictures approached Zemeckis and Gale about the possibility of continuing the adventures of Marty and Doc, the pair were amenable to the idea, but only if the original cast agreed to return as well. Both Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd agreed to return as long as Zemeckis, Gale, and Canton were involved, and Back to the Future Part 2 was up and running. As Zemeckis and Gale set out to fashion the story that Gale would eventually turn into the screenplay for Part 2, they realized that they would have to start where Part 1 left off, with Doc returning from the future announcing, "It's your kids, Marty. Something's got to be done about your kids." When we made Back to the Future, the original ending was merely a joke, explains Bob Gale. into the proverbial sunset and off to a new adventure. When we began the outline for part 2, we knew we'd have to start at that point because of all the letters we'd received. With so many people having seen the first film, we couldn't not pay off the promise. It wouldn't have been fair to all the fans of the original film. What neither Gale nor Zemeckis realized at the time they were formulating the second film was that they had a surplus of material and didn't know what to cut from their story. It was then, says Gale, that we made a good news, bad news phone call to Universal. The bad news, they explained to the executives, is that we can't make Back to the Future Part 2 for the summer of 1989. The good news is that we'll have Part 2 for Thanksgiving, and Back to the Future Part 3 for the summer after that. I think, recalls Gale, when we made that call, they thought we were kidding. They weren't. Words and pictures. So I'm just going to go through from here and start picking out things that stick out to me from each of these, and then I'll go back and read some more. But the words and pictures section right now, we have a picture here of, this is in 1985, Michael J. Fox and Bob Zemeckis take their first trip back to the future in the original movie. Now, Michael J. Fox was filming Family Ties at the time of this, so I believe he was having to work nights on Back to the Future, nights and weekends, and then days on Family Ties. So he was very busy, but he did some of his best work. So I don't know. Bob Gale's quoted here as saying, "Bob and I both come from middle-class families in the Midwest and have the same tastes in movies, both of us leaning towards films that intrigue, involve, and most of all entertain. This is, for me, one of the most entertaining movies ever. I could watch it over and over and over." We have a picture here. Let me raise it up so you can see. Of after Bob Gale makes his changes in the script, the revised pages are printed on different colored paper to reflect the date of the changes. The original shooting script of Part 3 was printed on blue paper. When the production wrapped, only 2 original blue pages remained untouched. So this is more, scripts now, productions try to go paperless as much as possible, but this principle still applies. And on a really long shoot, you can end up with a rainbow-colored script and schedules and all that. And it's one of the things I like about the scripts, having a paper script, is that you can see the changes, you can see the pages that are different, and it stands out to your eye. And you have a tactile script to turn versus using an iPad and just swiping through. But I love this very, very, old school style of production. Pre-email, pre-phones, pre-social media, pre-everything. It was all analog, and I really appreciate what they have going on here. This other picture here, it says, as the 3 movies cover a multitude of time boards and changes, Gale keeps a bulletin board in his office covered with index cards showing the progression of the adventures. The cards are all used as reference for scenes under revision. They still do this, but it's not typically done with cards. I'm sure there's somebody who might do it this way, but so much stuff is, computerized now and whatnot. They don't make them like they used to. Let's see. I'll read the rest of this here. For Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the Back to the Future trilogy has been a true collaboration. They co-wrote the first film, and on Part 2 and 3, Zemeckis and Gale conceived the story, with Gale writing the screenplays. Their ability to work together is a result of their similar backgrounds, sensibilities, and sense of humor. After they establish their premise, Zemeckis and Gale work on specific scenes for the story. putting them on index cards. That process is rarely done in a continuous order, as many scenes dictate necessary action in previous ones. We're great believers in the set it up, pay it off school of writing, says Gale. For instance, in order to have Marty invent rock and roll in 1955, it must be established that he knows how to play the guitar in 1985. Because we wanted to have Marty play Johnny Be Good at the dance, we knew we needed a scene in the beginning of the film where he auditions his band at the high school. Bob Zemeckis gives another example of how one joke led to an important creative decision. When Marty first arrives in 1955, we wanted the farm family to mistake the time machine for a flying saucer. We searched for the appropriate vehicle and found that the DeLorean's gold-wing doors and overall design gave it the resemblance of a spaceship. The DeLorean became our time machine. The writing process is never final. Actually, I'm going to back up. If this were to be remade today, I'm sure somebody would maybe use a Cybertruck for that. The writing process is never final. A script passes through several drafts before the cameras roll, and it changes throughout the film as well. The very first draft of the Back to the Future script was vastly different from the final product. Marty was originally a streetwise video pirate. The studio refused to let us make a film where the hero was a video pirate, explained Zemeckis. A video pirate. I'm trying to even think what that means. Oh gosh, I gotta go back to my 80s, 90s mental Rolodex. A video pirate. If anyone knows what that means, put it in the comments. I'd appreciate it. I'm guessing it means that he bootlegged movies or something. I don't know. Doc had a pet monkey instead of a dog. I'm glad they got rid of that. The time machine was not a car but resembled a refrigerator. We were concerned that kids would accidentally lock themselves in refrigerators, and Doc gets the power to return Marty to 1985 by taking the time machine to the site of an A-bomb test in the Nevada desert. It was too expensive to go on location. Thank God, sometimes having a small budget causes more creativity to come into play and a better product, Not a small budget, but a limited budget. Sometimes you notice that productions that have just unlimited money, they end up putting so much into the finished product that it's too much. It's not an enjoyable experience. Zemeckis is a perfectionist both during the shooting of the film and in post-production. He's never finished with an idea. From the moment he gets up in the morning, he's thinking how to make it better, observes first assistant director David McGifford. He's like an artist who retouches his picture even when it's hanging in the gallery. Director of photography Dean Cundy agrees the production of any Bob Zemeckis film can be called difficult. He's tenacious and relentless to achieve the final product as he envisions it. That's what also makes any Robert Zemeckis film an event. That's really cool. I would have liked to work on a Bob Zemeckis film. Here we've got the headings of Bob Gale, Neil Canton, who were the co-producers, and you can see them here. And the description says Bob Gale on the left and Neil Canton on the right have produced all three Back to the Futures, overseeing every aspect of the productions, from pre-production to the film's release. And then here we have another picture from, I believe this is the second Back to the Future, when Marty is in 1955 again. And anyway, so this section is talking about Robert Zemeckis. And the description for this picture says, 4 years after their first adventure, Michael J. Fox and Bob Zemeckis team up again for Back to the Future Part 2. I was right. And it says, I would not have agreed to do the sequels unless Bob was directing, says Fox. I love him. Over here it says, I caught the filmmaking bug in high school in St. Louis, says Bob Gale, where he participated in a senior class tradition, the making of a 16mm movie. From high school, Gale attended New Orleans Tulane University, where he majored in engineering. Because when you're from Missouri, the idea of going into movies is pretty crazy. After his first semester, the idea seemed a bit less crazy, and he applied to the film school of the University of Southern California. In his first year there, he befriended a classmate named Bob Zemeckis. Gale aspired to write and Zemeckis to direct, so they combined their talents. Something similar here happened to me when I was in school, and I realized that I kept changing majors because I would watch a movie and be so invested in the subject matter, I would want to major in that subject. So I'd watch Indiana Jones and I'd want to be an archaeologist, and I'd watch, let me think, I can't even think what else, some other movie, and I would want to do that job. And it wasn't until I think maybe The Hobbit came out, or not The Hobbit, excuse me, the first Lord of the Rings came out, and it finally dawned on me, oh, it's not the subject matter of the movie that you get excited about, it's the making of the movie. And I should have known, since I had this book, when I was 7 or 8 years old, and just soaked in everything from all the production behind the scenes info that's in here, which for that time period, you couldn't know this kind of stuff. You wouldn't get this kind of information. There was no internet to hear all the behind the scenes, how it's made. So this stuff really just, I loved it as a kid. Can't say it enough. Anyway, continuing. So Gale aspired to write and Zemeckis to direct, so they combined their talents. Together, they wrote 1941, I Wanna Hold Your Hand, and Used Cars. Gale also got his first producing credits during this time, initially as the associate producer on I Wanna Hold Your Hand and as the producer of Used Cars. While Zemeckis was directing Romancing the Stone, another great movie, Gale wrote and produced a TV pilot based on Used Cars. He has produced with Neil Canton and written all 3 Back to the Futures. Following the release of Part 3, Gale hopes to take some time off, and then plans to try my hand at directing. There are 2 screenplays I've written that I'd like to get off the ground. Now, here we are, what was this, 34 years later, and I have no idea what Bob Gale may have gone on to direct. If I looked it up, I would know, but if somebody else knows, put it in the comments. And I'd be interested. So, continuing on, Neil Canton was born and raised in New York City and graduated from American University in Washington, D.C. He studied government in college and was exposed to the film industry through his father, a prominent entertainment executive. After spending one summer in California working on a film, he decided to remain in Los Angeles permanently, choosing production as his intended career. I was hooked, quote unquote. His first job in the motion picture industry was that of assistant to director Peter Bogdanovich on What's Up, Doc? And they continued that association over the course of 4 films, including Paper Moon and Nickelodeon. Spielberg, and he helped Zemeckis and Gale obtain a development deal for an original screenplay. They wrote 1941, which Spielberg later directed. I feel that every film Zemeckis and Gale have made, says Spielberg, has been on a high order of pop culture art, something that I don't think many other filmmakers are tapping into. Zemeckis made his directorial debut with I Want to Hold Your Hand, a story about a group of teenagers trying to meet the Beatles during their first visit to America. Yes, I have seen that. It's been a long time. I like that movie. And followed it with Used Cars. His third film, Romancing the Stone, proved to be the turning point in his career, and its success afforded him the opportunity to direct another project he had co-written with Bob Gale, Back to the Future. The film was the highest-grossing movie of 1985 and further served to enhance Zemeckis' reputation as one of the top directors in the film industry. He spent the next 2 years perfecting a process to effectively blend live action with animated tunes, and received even greater acclaim as the director of 1988's top-grossing movie, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, one of also my top, 20 favorite movies. That's a great movie. Zemeckis has spent over 2 years in the production and distribution of the Back to the Future sequels and plans to take an immediate and extended vacation. He definitely earned that. I hope he had a great vacation. Having been immersed in the world of Back to the Future for so many years, I need to take some time to clear my brain, recharge the batteries, live life a bit, and see what happens. Now I wonder, and I've noticed this in my own career, that when I work on a movie or a TV show, I never am able to quite enjoy it as much as everybody else does that didn't work on it. And I would feel like these gentlemen, because they were so immersed in it and lived it, I wonder if they get the same, just sense of joy from the tip of your toes that you get from watching Back to the Future, that somebody who hasn't worked on it and seen the good and the bad would have. As a viewer, you only see the polished end product, and it's so enjoyable. And I actually would feel bad if they've never really been able to have the true joy of experiencing that from the side of a pure viewer. But, I guess that's how it goes. Them's the breaks. Alright, so here we have the heading of this section is called Bob's Vision, as told by the cast and crew. Oh, this will be interesting. What I see here is a picture from Back to the Future 3. I've watched that movie many times and wondered how they did all of this train work, because it is very dangerous filming on and near trains. But anyway, the caption for this picture here says the film crew positioned themselves on the train to film the sequence where the DeLorean is pushed into time travel by steam power. assume, actually, let me read it first. Yeah. Bob Zemeckis watches the day's video rushes with various members of the production team. Now, I don't know if you can see, but these are gigantic, I don't know, TV boxes or something that they watch this on. And now you just log in and watch it on your phone. It's all digital and it's all kind of boring to deal with. But also, I can really appreciate the 80s-ness of all this. You can see you can't really see it, but the old school earpiece and just their clothes and their everything about this. I love it. I love that time period. So here we go. Bob's vision as told by the cast and crew. If you leap for the moon, you might land on the roof. That's a quote by Bob Zemeckis right here. It says, you always plan more than you can possibly do, says Zemeckis of his approach to filmmaking. We put in much more than is necessary, and then it all shakes out in the actual production, finding what can and can't be done. If you start to compromise at the very beginning, nobody's going to let you add it later. The films I like to make are stories that are unique to the cinema, stories that not only record life, but in fact are larger than life and can be best told on a giant screen rather than in an opera or novel or any other arena. I think he would, have a stroke nowadays since everything goes straight to TV and streaming. It's very gross. That's where all the special effects, moving camera shots, wild characters, and humor come from. If you had to characterize what I do, I guess you'd call me an action-adventure, comedy, suspense, special effects, mass popular culture style director. That's all one word. And that word goes from here to here. It's a good thing I don't have to have business cards printed. They'd cost a fortune, particularly with how long his title is. Bob's so innovative, he's deceptive, explains David Gifford. He exudes calmness when all hell is breaking loose, and has the greatest quality a director can have. He inspires tremendous loyalty in the cast and crew. He sounds like a very good director. We know exactly what the other needs, says Michael J. Fox. We have a kind of shorthand, which is a wonderful relationship for an actor to have with a director. I trust him completely. If anyone else asked me to do the things that he's asked of me, I'd probably call my agent and have him get me the hell out of there. Bob has at times asked me to do enormously exaggerated moves and facial contortions that go against every instinct I have as an actor. But when he does, I know it's part of the plan, and I've never been disappointed with the results. One of the things that makes Bob my favorite director, says director of photography Dean Cundy, is that he's totally dedicated to the film, with no ego problems getting in the way. The story is the thing, agrees Fox. It's not about Bob being a hero with the camera, or any of the actors being heroes with performances. It's about telling the story, exciting people, and engaging them. He solicits contributions and suggestions, and is not afraid to listen to anybody about anything, says Dean Cundy. Bob embodies a most unique quality of being able to give specific direction, while also giving the cast and crew a sense of total freedom to contribute to the film's creation. Having shot part 2 and part 3 back to back, says Michael J. Fox, these people have been together for 11 months, and I don't think there's a single person on this production who has a bad word to say about Bob. The rest of the cast concur with Fox. He's the smartest man I've ever met, says Leah Thompson. He knows exactly what he wants and how to get it. You have to be a certain kind of actor to work with such a precise director. You have to trust him completely. Bob has never betrayed that trust or steered us disk in his brain. 100 megabytes, wow. I've never worked with anyone who has such a command of filmmaking, not only technically, but in the dramatic sense as well. He has a sense for a scene, a sense of when a joke is needed and when it isn't, knowing exactly what will work for each character. Technicalities. Zemeckis never constructs a stationary frame. He likes to use wide lenses, often shooting with the camera on a crane or dolly, which creates a fluidity of motion and also gives the audience greater accessibility to the action. I can see that now that I think about it. The technical side of filmmaking is something I've picked up over the years, says Zemeckis, and it's a side I don't particularly care for. Making films is a time-consuming process which can strain your patience, especially when dealing with special effects. Throwing those guys under the bus. Setting up for them is like watching grass grow, but they're necessary for movies like these. I'm sorry to keep interjecting my own thoughts here, but it's funny reading this for the first time in 30 some odd years. Now that I'm on the back end of having been in the film industry for 20 years and on set and reading this stuff as more of an insider now, or not an insider, but someone who's worked in the industry versus as an 8-year-old who dreamed of working in the industry, these things they're saying are, number one, they're true, and number two, they're hilarious, and number three, they're still true. To this day, 30 years later, they're still true. So making films is a time-consuming process which can strain your patience, especially when dealing with special effects. Setting up for them is like watching grass grow, but they're necessary for movies like these. The reward is the way they finally turn out and the amount of fun they provide in the finished product. After filming has completed, that finished product is the result of months of painstaking work in post-production, where Zemeckis remains an intimate participant. Editors Artie Schmidt and Harry Karamidas revealed that the director gotta skip over. Where did it go? Innumerable changes to his work, tightening the scenes in some places, reworking them in others. Says Karamidas, a Robert Zemeckis film is never final until there's an audience watching it in the theater. Oh boy. Okay. I remember this page, and I remember just being so enamored of the complexity of this movie. As a funny side story, when I was in first grade, we were not that great at writing and spelling, and we were still writing on paper that had the wide lines with the hash marks in between, so you could practice your writing. And like one 8.5 by 11 page, you only had maybe 4 or 5 of those lines because they were so big, because you were still learning to write. And they would tell us to write a story, and a story on that size paper would only be a few sentences at most. Was all you could fit. And I remember as a first grader, I was so obsessed. I would have this complicated story about the flux capacitor and the time machine and the DeLorean, and like telling the story of Back to the Future on one sheet of paper with 4 giant learn to write lines on it, and raising my hand and asking the teacher's assistant, how do you spell flux capacitor? And this woman looking at me like I had a foot growing out of my head. Like, child, what are you talking about? Just write something simple. And I never could. I always had to. It had to be. I was just very obsessed with this movie. But yeah. So anyway, so this section is the Space-Time Continuum. would be interested to know his story. Um, so in this graphic, what we see is, let me figure out where it starts, at the 1, okay. So we start here at 1985, and Marty travels back to 1955, and at the end of the first movie, he travels back, wait a minute, that's not right, yeah, travels back to 1985, and it's a slightly different, timeline, because he changes a few things here that improves his family's life here. So yeah, technically that's a second 1985. And then, let me get my hand out of the way. At the end of the first movie and beginning of the second movie, Marty, Doc Brown, and Jennifer, played by Elizabeth Shue in the second movie, travel to the future to 2015, which is 9 years ago. Good grief. I know. Do you feel old now? And during that, they travel back to 1985, but it's an alternate 1985 because Marty causes some issues here, and Biff causes some other issues. I won't get into all of it, but it's an alternate 1985. Oh yeah, there's a description here. Yeah, well, I was right. Okay, so Marty goes to 1955, and then Marty changes history. Yep, in 1955, goes back to 1985, number 2, in which George is a success instead of a wimp. Wow, I described that virtually perfectly, and I hadn't even seen this here. That gives each leg of this a description. I feel very proud. And then Doc takes Marty and Jennifer to 2015, and now we're caught back up. Okay, so, okay, picking up where I left off. So, old Biff. Oh, wait, okay, I'm confused. So, a funny thing happened while I was going through the most complicated diagram in the book. The doorbell rang, and then when I tried to go back and continue where I left off, the phone rang, and then when I tried again, the other phone rang. So now I'm thoroughly confused as to where I left off in this incredibly complicated story timeline. So just to review, our hero Marty starts in 1985 and travels back to 1955, and then he travels to an alternate version of 1985, and then at the end of the first movie and beginning of the second movie, Doc Brown, Marty, and Jennifer all traveled to the future, to 2015, which was 9 years ago if you're keeping count. And while they're there, old Biff steals the DeLorean, goes back to 1955, and gives himself the almanac. Marty buys an almanac here so that he can try to place bets, and Doc tells him no, and old Biff, overhears it, so he steals the DeLorean, goes back to 1985, and gives it to his younger self. Now, what always gets me here is how nonplussed old Biff is about the time machine. Like, he sees the DeLorean and Marty and the Doc talking out on the street after Marty pretends to be his son, Marty Jr., and gets rid of Griff's gang, Griff the nightmare. um, and then the next leg of the journey is Doc and Marty go to 1985 again to retrieve the almanac from Biff. So they go back to 1955. If I said 85, I meant 55. And they go back to the same night that the clock tower gets struck by lightning. So they have to avoid interacting with their past selves in this whole interaction. And it's really brilliant how they seamlessly weave all that in. I mean, even just the I don't know if you call it CG, but the visual effects um, work in this movie is great, especially considering the time that it was made. So after they go back to 1955, while they're there in the middle of the lightning storm, the Doc is in the DeLorean, he's flying, and the DeLorean gets struck by lightning, so he gets sent back to 1885 to the Old West. So that's the end of the second movie. The third movie picks up right after that happens. It picks up right after that happens. And Marty goes back to 1885 to rescue the Doc, and he uses his 1955 counterpart, the Doc of 1955, Doc's 1955 counterpart, to go back to 1885. And in the process of